When a MiG-21 faced a faster F-4 Phantom, could a smaller, lighter fighter possibly defeat one of the most powerful jets of the Cold War? On a hot afternoon in the skies above North Vietnam, in the summer of 1967, a lone Soviet-designed MiG-21 interceptor climbed into the humid air. Its pilot was young, his aircraft simple and lightweight. Yet somewhere above the clouds, two American F-4 Phantom II fighters were already patrolling the same sky. The Phantom was faster, heavily armed, designed for long-range combat. On paper, the outcome seemed obvious. But aerial combat has never been decided by numbers alone. At approximately 14:02 hours on July 7, 1967, radar operators near Hanoi detected American aircraft approaching from the Gulf of Tonkin. Within minutes, pilots from the 921st Fighter Regiment of the Vietnamese People's Air Force were ordered into the air. Among them was a MiG-21 pilot flying a Mikoyan-Gurevich MiG-21 PFM, a supersonic interceptor capable of Mach 2 speeds but carrying only two short-range K-13 air-to-air missiles. Waiting above them were aircraft from the U.S. Air Force's 8th Tactical Fighter Wing, flying the formidable F-4 Phantom II. The Phantom had better radar, more missiles, and greater range. But what happened next would become one of the most remarkable examples of aerial maneuvering ever recorded in jet combat. Pause. Because in the skies over Vietnam that day, speed alone would not decide the battle. By 1967, the air war over North Vietnam had intensified dramatically. The United States had launched Operation Rolling Thunder, a sustained bombing campaign designed to cripple North Vietnam's military infrastructure. Every week, formations of American aircraft crossed into hostile airspace. Their targets included bridges, rail yards, supply depots, and airfields. Protecting these bombers were some of the most advanced fighters in the world. The F-4 Phantom II was the centerpiece of American air superiority. Developed by McDonnell Aircraft, it was a twin-engine powerhouse capable of reaching Mach 2.2, carrying radar-guided missiles, and engaging enemy aircraft from miles away. To American pilots, the Phantom was a technological marvel. But North Vietnam's air defenses were built on a very different philosophy. Rather than matching American technology directly, the Vietnamese relied on agility, surprise, and ground-controlled interception. Their primary fighters were Soviet-built MiG-17s and MiG-21s, operated by experienced pilots trained in both the Soviet Union and China. The MiG-21, though smaller and simpler than the Phantom, possessed several advantages. It was lightweight, extremely maneuverable at certain speeds, and capable of tight turning engagements that heavier aircraft struggled to match. But the aircraft also had severe limitations. Its radar was primitive, fuel endurance was short, often less than 45 minutes of combat time, and it carried only two missiles. In many engagements, MiG pilots had exactly one chance to strike before needing to return to base. The American pilots knew this. They believed their superior radar, speed, and missile technology would keep them safe. Yet the Vietnamese had developed a strategy. They would not fight on American terms. Instead, they relied on ambush tactics guided by radar stations on the ground. Controllers would track incoming U.S. aircraft and vector MiG fighters into optimal positions, often approaching unseen from below or behind cloud cover. It was a dangerous game of cat and mouse played at 20,000 feet and above. And on July 7, 1967, that deadly game was about to unfold again. By early afternoon, American strike aircraft were already forming over the Gulf of Tonkin. Their mission was to attack rail infrastructure northwest of Hanoi. Among the escort fighters were two F-4 Phantom IIs flying combat air patrol approximately 60 miles east of the city. Their call sign, Silver Flight. Each Phantom carried AIM-7 Sparrow radar-guided missiles and AIM-9 Sidewinder heat-seeking missiles, along with thousands of pounds of fuel. Inside the lead aircraft sat Captain Robert Lawson, a veteran pilot with dozens of missions over North Vietnam. His radar intercept officer monitored the skies carefully. Nothing on scope, the officer reported. At that moment, however, radar operators near Hanoi were already watching them. Inside a dimly lit control room, Vietnamese ground controllers tracked the American formation. A blip appeared on the radar screen. A MiG-21 scrambled from Noi Bai Air Base, climbing rapidly toward the engagement zone. Its pilot followed strict instructions transmitted over the radio. Climb to 18,000 feet. Maintain radio silence. Approach from the west. The MiG pilot could not see the American aircraft yet, but the ground controllers could. By 1357 hours, the distance between them was shrinking rapidly. The MiG accelerated to nearly Mach 1.3, climbing through thin cloud layers as humid air buffeted the aircraft's small delta wings. Inside the cockpit, the pilot's oxygen mask muffled his breathing. Fuel was limited. Missiles armed. The entire mission would likely last less than 10 minutes. Meanwhile, the American Phantoms continued their patrol, scanning for threats. Their radar was powerful, but the MiG's small size and low-altitude approach made detection difficult. For several minutes, both sides closed the distance unknowingly. Then, suddenly, the radar officer in the Phantom spoke. "Contact, possible target low." But by the time the Americans reacted, the MiG was already climbing sharply toward them. What happened next would unfold in seconds, because aerial combat in the jet age moves faster than human reaction. And now, three fighters were converging at nearly 1,200 miles per hour combined speed. At 14:02 hours, the MiG pilot spotted the American aircraft, two large silhouettes against the afternoon sky. The Phantom fighters were nearly 3 times heavier than his aircraft, but they were also fast and deadly. If the Americans detected him first, they could fire a Sparrow missile from miles away. The MiG pilot had to close the distance. Immediately, he accelerated and climbed, attempting to position himself behind the trailing Phantom. Inside Silverflight, the radar officer suddenly shouted,
MiG 6 o'clock low.
Captain Lawson pulled the Phantom into a defensive turn. The second Phantom broke formation and climbed sharply to gain altitude advantage. Within seconds, the comm patrol had turned into a chaotic dogfight. The MiG launched its first missile, a K-13 Atoll, the Soviet equivalent of the Sidewinder. The missile streaked toward the Phantom, but Lawson reacted instantly, dumping flares and rolling into a hard brake turn. The missile passed harmlessly behind the aircraft. Now the Phantoms counterattacked. One of them fired a Sidewinder missile. The heat-seeking weapon curved toward the MiG's engine exhaust. The Vietnamese pilot pulled violently on the control stick. The MiG snapped into a sharp turn, the small aircraft banking far tighter than the larger Phantom could manage. The missile lost lock. It exploded harmlessly in the distance. Now the sky above Vietnam had become a deadly spiral of maneuvering jets. The Phantom had the advantage in speed, but the MiG possessed one critical strength: turning ability. And the pilot knew exactly how to use it. Yet the situation was still desperate. 2 Phantoms against 1 MiG. Missiles nearly exhausted. Fuel running low. One mistake would mean death. Captain Lawson attempted to use the Phantom's speed to climb away and re-engage from distance. But the MiG pilot anticipated the maneuver. Instead of chasing directly, he cut inside the Phantom's turn. This was the critical moment. The MiG-21's delta wing design allowed it to sustain extremely tight turns at high speed. The Phantom, heavy and wide, struggled to match the maneuver. Within seconds, the MiG had shortened the distance dramatically, from 1,500 yards to 800 yards to less than 500 yards. Inside Lawson's cockpit, warning tones screamed, "He's turning inside us." The MiG pilot lined up his final missile, but instead of firing immediately, he tightened the turn even further, forcing the Phantom into a wider arc. This maneuver placed the American aircraft directly in front of him. The moment lasted only seconds. Then the MiG pilot fired. The second K-13 missile launched from the wing rail and streaked forward. This time there was no escape. The missile struck the Phantom's tail section. A bright explosion filled the sky. The American aircraft began trailing smoke. Captain Lawson and his radar officer ejected moments later, parachuting toward the jungle below. The remaining Phantom attempted to pursue the MiG, but the smaller fighter executed another tight turn and dove toward cloud cover. With fuel nearly exhausted, the MiG pilot disengaged and headed back toward Hanoi. What had just happened stunned both sides. A single MiG-21 had outmaneuvered 2 F-4 Phantoms, not with superior technology, but with skill, timing, and one perfectly executed turn. Captain Lawson survived the ejection but was captured shortly after landing. He would spend years as a prisoner of war before returning home. The damaged Phantom was written off as a combat loss. For the Vietnamese pilot, the victory became one of several credited kills during the air war. Pilots of the 921st Fighter Regiment gained a reputation for aggressive, highly disciplined tactics. Their strategy emphasized short engagements, surprise attacks, and tight maneuvering combat. Over time, American pilots learned from these encounters. New training programs were introduced, including advanced dogfighting instruction and changes in missile tactics. These lessons would later influence the creation of famous programs like Top Gun and the Red Flag exercises. The skies over Vietnam became one of the most intense proving grounds in the history of aerial warfare. Between 1965 and 1973, hundreds of dogfights took place above jungles, mountains, and rivers. Each encounter tested the limits of both machines and men.
The battle between the MiG-21 and the F-4 Phantom demonstrated a timeless truth in air combat.
Technology alone does not guarantee victory. Skill, courage, and split-second decisions often matter more. And sometimes, the entire outcome of a battle can be decided by a single maneuver.
In this case, one tight turn